Welcome to an all-new episode of Get Lit with Lianna, the podcast. Join me as I sit down with a new guest author in each episode to discuss their books, careers, and everything in between. Today's episode is very exciting for a variety of reasons, but mostly because I'm joined by K.A. Tucker, who is one of my all-time favorite romance authors, and she's Canadian. But she's written some of my favorite love stories that I've ever read, from The Simple Wild to Say You Still Love Me to The Player Next Door to Until It Fades. The list goes on and on. She's so insanely talented. She's written so many books from an array of genres, from romance to fantasy to suspense. There really is no limit with what she can do. And I can't wait to talk to her today about her inspiration for some of these books, how she's managed to write in so many different genres, and so much more. So here we go. My conversation with the incredible K.A. Tucker starts now. Welcome, K.A. Tucker, to the podcast. This is very exciting. I'm so happy you're here.
For having me. It's great to finally meet you. We've kind of been back and forth a bit online, so it's nice to finally talk to you.
I know, it's so nice to finally be able to do this in person, kind of over Zoom.
Kind of.
Sort of. But before we get into some of my favorite books of yours, because I have so many, I would love to know a little bit more about you, just because I'm not so familiar with your background. So can you take me back to the beginning? How did the writing career start? What were you doing before you were writing? Let's just go way back.
Sure. I come from a sales background. So I wasn't writing. It wasn't something that I went to school for or anything. I went to school for business. When I was little, obviously I wrote all kinds of little stories, and I loved doing that with princesses and dragons and all of that. But that passion kind of, disappeared, I guess, as I grew up. And then, so I went to school, had a whole career, had my kids, had 2 kids. And when my second one was very young and I was at home on maternity leave. I'm Canadian, so I was at home for a year. And it was a couple months in at that point. And it was a bit tough, to be honest. It was tough. I had a difficult second child. And then my first child actually ended up, later on, we found out she was diagnosed with autism.
Oh,
but
wow.
At that time, we didn't know that. So it was a tough, a tough situation, and I needed an escape for myself. And I had been reading obviously for years, but I thought, you know what, I have an idea. I'm just going to sit down and write, and I'm going to do this for myself completely and just as an escape. And then I started writing, and I just fell madly in love with it again. I really, really, really found my passion. And so then from there, it was still hobby. It was still years of a hobby of learning how to write, really. And I knew that it was something I wanted to do. And I went back to work full time, but I was still writing at night after the kids were in bed, and self-publishing. So I self-published several fantasy type stories just on the regular platforms. And again, just a hobby. And then I self-published 10 Tiny Breaths. And that one did extremely, extremely well. And then from there, it kind of just snowballed. And I received an offer for representation. I received an offer from a publisher. And at that point, I knew something had to give. I couldn't do it all. I've been writing full time for, I guess, since 2013.
Oh, wow.
9 years now. Yeah. And I write across several genres, and I've got different types of romance, and I've got a couple of thriller suspense type books. I have a YA that I actually wrote for my older daughter. That's Be the Girl. And I have some really steamy romance, a couple of series of those. And then Simple Wild, which is kind of a romance and women's fic blend. So I'm kind of all over the place. I have a fantasy now. I'm working on the second one. So
I heard
so I'm all over the place.
you are somebody that I've been dying to speak to, just because you have dabbled in so many different genres and excelled in all of them, which I feel is crazy. And we don't see many authors that are doing so well in so many diverse different types of stories. But before we get into some of my favorites, because obviously I'm a big romance girl and those are my number one favorite books of yours that I really want to get into. But before we do that, I need to hear more about like how the whole 10 Tiny Breaths thing took off. Like from your end and your perspective, like one day you self-published the book and then how soon after did it take off? Like what was that experience like?
So, you know what, it was pretty immediate. I would say I was lucky. I was self-publishing, or I self-published that book at kind of the right time in the market. There was that point where there weren't a ton of self-published or indie books, and there was a big hunger for it from readers. And so it was a good time. It was 2012, December 2000. Yeah, it was December 2012. It was a great time to be self-publishing. But I'd also built up a readership at that point because I'd had several fantasy of kind of a YA fantasy paranormal series. So it wasn't out of the gate. Like I was just out of their hi, it's me. I had a few years and a few books that I had brought some readers in who were interested in seeing kind of the other side, the romance side, and bloggers. And so I was able to reach out to bloggers, and they were really, really great with helping with that. I hired a publicist, so that was also great. So I had help, and then on top of that, I had a lot of luck. And then, it was December, as I said, that I published that. And then January, I think it was January 2nd or whatever, the first day back from the Christmas holidays was when the publishing industry shuts down. And the first day back, the editor emailed me. And then from there, it was like, here's your contract. And then I signed it and the ink was almost still wet. And then I was phoning to give my notice for my job. So because at that point, I'm like, wow, I have 3 more books I have to write. And one of them is due in 6 weeks and God.
So what's your writing like schedule like? Do you devote like specific time to the day? Do you treat it like a 9 to 5 where you're only going to write between these hours? Or do you kind of do it like whenever you have a moment? Like how have you managed to devote time to writing while managing everything else in your life? I know you mentioned you have 2 kids, you have pets, you're doing a lot of things.
You know what? It used to be the whenever I had a little bit here and there, that's how I used to do it because that's the only way that I could do it. Having 2 small children and a career and everything, it was always at night, or if I could squeeze a half hour here or an hour there. I can't do that anymore. And I think just partially because it's now my career, but also my brain just doesn't work like that anymore. It has changed somewhat, I guess, maybe with each book that I write. And so now I have to sit down in good long blocks of time. I need to be able to know I've got a few hours at least where I don't have to be running in and out. There's not people coming in and out of my office. I have a door and it's closed and the walls. And, I'm not a person that can go to Starbucks and I get so distracted so easily. So as soon as people are around, I'm listening as opposed to writing. And so I'm pretty specific that way. My best hours I figured out are between 10 and 2 p.m., but I write after that as well. Like I was writing about half an hour ago. And I usually then turn into a pumpkin at a certain point. I know that like my evenings, my late night around, when I say late, I mean like 8, 9 o'clock. That's late. Will be kind of for first draft, messy draft, just get something on the page. I might squeeze in 500 words or something at night before picking up a book or going to bed. But it's never anything good. The next day I go fix it. So, I've got my routine now of I know what works and what doesn't. I know after a certain time or when I hit a certain wall, I need to stop.
Right.
But I do work long hours. I do when I'm on deadline. It's usually 7 days a week.
Wow.
Just because that's how I need to be fully immersed and if I pull myself out, it's I don't know, it's like not working out for a while and then getting back into it.
Right. I'm sure.
Yeah. But, and then when I finish a book and I get it to the editor, I've now started, and actually a friend of mine, she said that she did this and now I do it too. And it's brilliant where I take a month off between books. So when I finish, but which is fine because I probably have a month or two's worth of marketing and administration to catch up on that I've done nothing with, right?
Okay.
I just leave it there as I'm on deadline and I'm not looking at any of that stuff. And
Right.
so then
Okay.
I'm kind of scrambling to catch up with all the business side of writing, because it's never just the books, right? There's a whole other side of it.
Right. And you oversee a lot of that for yourself, or do you have a team behind you that helps?
No, I do most of it myself. I am starting now. I'm starting to get help.
Okay.
And I mean, I have a publicist company they're a publicity company that I work with. And I'm starting to get help with some social media, and I'm starting to get
Amazing.
help with things, but it's mostly me. So,
Crazy. Because you're doing so much, truly so much. But I'm really curious about how you manage to jump between genres and do it so successfully. Like when you're immersed in a romance story, is it hard for you then to jump and go do a fantasy and then go jump to do a suspense? Or do you stay in a romance brain and try to bang out as many romances as you can? Like, how do you go back and forth? Or do you find it even hard to go back and forth?
it's, you know what, it's actually not for me. I find when I just finished Running Wild, which
Yeah.
was a contemporary romance with, you kind of, like I said, a women's fic blend in that world. And I finished that and I put it aside, and I knew that I was moving into fantasy after, and I was quite relieved, because I could not step back into that world again. And I'm finding that more and more now. I'm a mood reader. I'm apparently also a mood writer, because
Okay.
I need to be in the mood. Um, and yeah, when I sit down to write a book, I give it my all, and I really, really, really focus on Running Wild, very focused on that. And now I need to step back, and being able to shift between different genres, I find stretches my brain, really, right?
Right.
Because I have to switch, I have to think differently.
You're working different muscles.
Yeah, and I think in the long run, I think that's going to make me a better and more well-rounded writer, I think, personally.
Sure.
So, I mean, for me anyway.
For sure. Well, speaking of Running Wild, the first book I read of yours was The Simple Wild, because I've always been a reader, but in the height of the pandemic, obviously there was a lot of downtime, and I was like, I can't keep numbing my brain rewatching Gossip Girl and the same TV shows that I've been doing forever. So I was like, I need to start reading. And I went on Goodreads and I was looking up top romances, and The Simple Wild immediately caught my attention because it had mentioned that the girl, Calla, was from Toronto. And I'm from Montreal, but I've been living in Toronto for the last 10 years.
Oh,
So
I
when
didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
I'm just north of Toronto.
Okay. So when I saw that the protagonist was a Toronto girl, I was like, I feel like I'll be able to relate to this. And I picked up the book. Me and two friends, we all buddy read it together, the three of us, all of us Toronto. And I wish I had those texts to read them off to you. We were cackling. My friend was like, she's putting on her heels and she's going out in Yorkville. Like, where do you think she's going? Let's pretend. Like, is she going to Casimoto? Where is she going? Like, we were all dying. And that hooked me right away. And I loved the book, read the book. I was obsessed. Like, I still am obsessed. I think I've read it 2 or 3 times. I really love it. But it seemed like after I read it, everyone started speaking about The Simple Wild. Like, even my friends that weren't big readers, everyone independently was finding out about the book. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, did you notice a huge bump in readers and people reaching out to you during the pandemic? Was that a big time for you, especially with that series?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, so it's a combination of things. It was, yes, for definitely because of the pandemic. There were a lot of people stuck at home, and all of a sudden, really, same thing. They're like, how many Netflix shows can I watch?
Right.
And so then they finally, a lot of new readers came out. But also, I released Wild at Heart in February of 2020, which was right before the pandemic. And so the timing for that, I mean, it was good in the sense that every time that you release a new book, there's noise behind it. Like a new book within a series, there's noise behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that drew in people who hadn't read The Simple Wild. So, and then Forever Wild, I released that December of 2020. Yes. So it was almost a year.
Right.
And then I just released this one. So yeah, just kind of staggering or stretching them out by a year is I think has helped. and just releasing more in the series has definitely brought more people in.
Yeah. And building out the story world and writing about some of the other people, not just Calla and Jonah. I feel like everything I've heard from everyone that's read them has loved all of the books for a variety of different reasons. But the number one thing I see, at least online, is that Jonah is like the ultimate grumpy hero. And I was laughing. I saw that you were posting on your Instagram the little bookmarks of him, how he was drawn out.
Oh, right. That was like the little cutout, the Jonah cutout with the green. Yeah.
And I was like, this is exactly how I pictured him, like to a T. And I'm curious, like, what the inspiration was behind his character in particular. Cause I know, like, I really resonated with Calla being like a Toronto girl, but Jonah being so like grizzly and mountainy. And I'm just so curious, like, where you got that inspiration from and to create a character like him.
I can't say that it was any one thing. Obviously he was going to be attractive because I needed him to be attractive for Calla and because it's a romance, right? So, but I did like the idea of him being completely unattractive at first. And so, trying to spin that is a little bit, so of course he's going to look like a Yeti, right? So, but yeah, I mean, in terms of his personality, I knew I wanted somebody very strong-willed and he is stubborn, and he's a bit bullish and bullheaded, but he also has a heart of gold. And I wanted to balance, all of those things. And so he was a character that took me a little bit to get to. And then when I got there with him, I'm like, this is exactly what I wanted. And now it's so easy to write him. So
he stuck with you this whole time. It's easy to go back to him. Now to get on to two of my favorite books of yours. I don't know which one to go into first because I love them both equally. And I feel like neither of them are spoken about enough because I just feel like everyone hears your name and they automatically associate you with either like your fantasy books or The Simple Wild. But I am obsessed beyond measure with Until It Fades.
Oh, yeah, great. Oh, good.
I can't even begin to tell you. And when I read the plot, the synopsis of the book, and I was like, this is just calling my name for a million different reasons. First of all, like the famous person, regular person trope is my number one bread and butter favorite trope. But then we have a hockey player, which is just being Canadian, like growing up, all of my crushes as a teenager were like players on the Montreal Canadiens. So like that I was just dying over. And I need to know, like, where did the story idea come from? Like, why did you choose to use a hockey player? Like, was it just because the Canadian in you thought that would be a cool tie-in? Like, tell me about the whole hockey part first, and then you could tell me about the inspiration for the story.
I mean, I don't know why I can't say that I specifically said, it has to be a hockey player, but to me that was interesting. Like it was an interesting twist on it, right? Because he's got the hockey player, which gives him his own kind of famous persona, but then he has the background with his mom, right? And his but his mother, right? Who's a movie actress. So it was just a little bit of a different twist on a trope that's fairly common. And of course, I love hockey. We are not watching the Leafs so much lately, but we were until they've, disappointed and crushed us over and over and over again.
We're not really watching the Montreal Canadiens either after last season. We're also taking a little bit.
We're not watching a lot. We used to be diehard every Saturday night. We'd watch the game, make the pizza, and then everything. And it's been a bit soul crushing the last few years. So. That's an aside, but for a long time, that's what we would do. And I love hockey. And my daughter plays hockey and my husband plays hockey. And, so we're definitely a hockey family. So that's where that came from. And then from an inspiration for the story, I think if I recall, I know at one point I remember thinking, that tragic accident with Paul Walker, right?
Oh my God.
And and in my head I was thinking, gosh, what if somebody could have just pulled him out, before that happened? I mean, I know that it was not going to happen, but imagine, and then from there, that's how I always start my stories, is just some little idea like that,
right?
And then I spun it, and I all of my stories, I always focus on the female. And so Catherine is obviously the the heroine in it, and I wanted a story. I wanted to build a story around her. And so she's got her past, and and then she comes in, and then there's that tragedy, and he's a cinnamon roll hero. He's not grumpy. He's not. There's no enemy. Yeah. There's no not. And I felt like there didn't need to be that, because there was so much drama that she was bringing in, and then the drama of the night, and yeah, I loved writing that story. I wrote that after. I want to say it was after. Yes, it was after He Will Be My Ruin, which was a thriller, which was difficult and dark and like murdery. And after that I was like, I need romance. Like I need a fluffy romance. And that's why I went with Until It Fades.
It's so crazy to me that you could jump from one like subject matter to another like that, like so seamlessly, and just get your brain into that. I feel like I would just be like stuck on the thriller that I had just written and not be able to like throw myself into a romance. So it's such a big credit to you and your writing ability and your brain. It's incredible, really incredible.
I mean, for me, I couldn't, if you had said to me now, right, you've just written He Will Be My Ruin, go write another thriller like that. I think my head would explode. So I'm like, nope, I need a break. I need to move away. I need something very fresh. I think that's what it is. I always need to keep it fresh.
Right.
And so being able to change genres is a fresh way to write for me.
One of my other favorite parts of Until It Fades is the fact that Catherine's a single mom. And I admittedly haven't read many single mom romances or single parent romances, but I know that you did it in Until It Fades and you did it in The Player Next Door, both books I adore. So I'm curious if it was at all challenging or what maybe the intention was in doing it in both of those books. Is there a theme? Like, I'm just curious about that and how you wrote it in such a way that it wasn't cliche, it wasn't cheesy, it was just a genuine story, and how it was incorporated into both love stories so well.
I wouldn't say that it was necessarily intentional, but at the same time, I mean, I think it's a snapshot of reality. I mean, I have friends who are single, everyone, or when I say single, I should say are divorced or never got married and had a child. I know several people in that situation. And it's just typical. It's that nuclear family is not so typical anymore. And so I wanted to, I mean, I always like to take a realistic approach to every family and every character that I build. So
yeah, I really love that. I love that in both of those books. But another one of my favorite books is Say You Still Love Me. And I love it for a variety of reasons, mostly because it's a second chance romance, but also because it's a dual timeline, which to me seems like the most challenging thing in the world to write. And I'm sure you're going to tell me, oh, you're nodding your head.
It's hard. It's hard.
Okay. So I need to first hear about that. Like what kind of techniques do you do? What kind of outlining do you do? Like, how do you successfully write a second chance romance that's going back and forth in timelines?
So I'm not a big plotter. That's probably an understatement. I do not plot. I have learned over the years and over the books to very loosely outline. And when I say loosely, I mean a one-page, here's some major themes and points and beginning, middle, end, and acts, and just plot out. And then it's more of just so that I'm not shooting an arrow into a forest with no target. It gives me a very small target that I will probably not hit, and I usually never do. But so that's the extent of my outlining.
Okay.
That and because I need to develop characters and the story as I get to know the characters. That's how a lot of the time how I develop the story. And I need to make sure that the story meets the characters or matches the characters that I want to be creating. So it's a lot. I do a lot of revising throughout. Okay. I'll say that first of all. So I'm not the type of person to write from beginning to the end and then go back. I hit walls regularly. I hit walls at about 50% every single time.
Really?
And I have to go back and I have to change everything because things aren't working and heading in the direction that I want them to go. In the case of Say You Still Love Me, now also I write I'm a linear writer. So I have to start at the beginning and write through. I can't write scenes here and there and everywhere and kind of just attach them and put them together. I can't do that.
Okay. I was going to ask if that's how you wrote this one, but that's interesting that you always write it linear.
Yeah, I'm a linear writer. Because I lose feeling of the story if I don't write in a linear path, I guess.
But when you're writing like the dual timeline of it all, are you writing the past at once and then the present, or are you going back and forth as you're writing, like literally linear writing?
Yeah, literally back, like going from chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Okay. And the tough thing about that book, especially, but writing past and present, is you're creating or you're developing characters in two very different parts of their lives. Right. And people change, right? And obviously in Say You Still Love Me, they definitely changed. And so it's very difficult to develop two kind of sets of, not personalities, but two sets of characters, really. It was tough. It was, I will not lie, that was a tough book to write, but I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed, incorporating the friends and, and everything in the family, and as I always do.
It was a really big story, but I loved that the past scenes took place in a summer camp, because I grew up in a summer camp. Honestly, I feel like every time I read a book of yours, I'm like, did she know me? Like, there's just like little hints of me in all of your books. I don't know if that means that I'm very basic and I'm very like, well, spread out and I have a lot of interests, but summer camp is something that like is very dear to my heart. I spent like 15 years going to camp, and I've never read like a romance book that takes place in a summer camp. So I didn't even know that going into Say You Still Love Me, that that's what the past was. But did you have a summer camp experience, a summer camp romance? Like, where did the summer camp of it all come into play?
So I didn't go to summer camp other than one summer camp it's a horse camp, and I was like 7 and it was not fun. So no, I was not a camp girl, but my kids have been going to camp. And so up at our cottage in Northern Ontario, I would take them to a day camp there, a great camp right on the lake, and we drop them off in the morning. And so I've been doing that for a few years, especially if I was writing that way, when they were younger. Now they're a little bit older, and COVID and everything makes camp difficult, right? That's kind of stolen a few years, which is unfortunate. But I would drop them off. And then the funny thing is because I had no internet at my cottage, I still have no internet at my cottage. So if I had if I had any emails or anything that I had to do for work, this is about a 15-20 minute drive from my cottage. I would tether my phone on, because I could get reception there, and I'd sit in the parking lot, and I'd just like catch up and whatever. But as I'm doing that, I'm watching the camp counselors and everything come through, and I'm just watching to see what's going on. And I started to think, God, these guys must get into a lot of trouble here, right? They're there. These counselors are there for 8 weeks or something like that, living there. And then I actually started asking a few questions. And I always pull readers. A lot of the time, I'll go for research, and I reached out to my reader group. I have a Facebook group, and so I just reached out to them and said, hey, any of you guys have been camp counselors? I've got an idea, and I was just curious, what's this like? And so some of the stories that I got from people were fantastic. Sure. So yeah, that's how that came about.
It's so funny because when I went to camp, it was always a thing that our camp directors would say to us, like, this is a camp for campers, not a camp for staff. And that was always a thing that they would reiterate, like, this is a camp for campers, not a camp for staff. But obviously when you have that kind of like environment, the counselors are young. They're in their late teens, early teens. Like, they're obviously going to go wild. I have to say, I never experienced anything nearly as wild as what goes on in your book. But there was definitely
a lot of the stuff that I brought up were spin-offs of actual real stories, right? So I wasn't making it wasn't completely exaggerated. I'll say that.
So the people in your reader group went to more wild camps than I did. But I have to say that when I was reading it, I was totally picturing my camp. And even though it's obviously a completely different place, like when you were talking about the cliff and all these things, I was like, I'm envisioning where I like grew up. So that was also another like little like piece of home that I felt while reading that book. Another part that I loved is the whole forbidden love storyline, and how her father really didn't want her to be with her boyfriend. So can you just tell me, like, the forbidden love of it all, was that always going to be part of the storyline? I know you said you're not so much of a plotter. So like, when did that come in? I'm curious about that because it's also one of my favorite tropes.
I always knew. So usually when I go in, I usually know, is this going to be an enemies to lovers situation? Is this going to be, or forbidden love? What is it going to be?
Mm-hmm.
So I always do. And I knew that. And I wanted to do a story because I knew, I knew that she would be coming from a wealthy family and that, in the present, I wanted a powerful female, executive. I wanted to show that. I didn't want it to be the billionaire man. I wanted it to be the female. So
yeah, it's such an awesome role reversal.
So there were, I'm not a plotter, but a lot of the time when I come in, I try and shape around in my head. I try to shape what I want this story to be. What the conflict will be, or what the situation might be.
Right.
So I always knew that going in. I knew it had to be, and I mean, in that case, it's the easiest thing is rich and poor, right? And what families you're from, and when I say easiest, I mean to write. Or easiest to understand, I guess, for readers. Everyone experiences that. So
right. And when you write your books in general, not about any specific, but when you're writing your books, do you picture them like as movies in your head?
I do write in scenes. So that's how I write. I don't picture movie characters or anything like actors. I'm never in my head thinking, oh, this character that I'm writing is this person, this actress or actor.
Okay.
I don't think that way, but I write in scenes. So it's very, very specific of, walking into a room and okay, this is where it's starting, or walking in, or so I do write in that sense.
It's interesting that you say that because I find, especially when I read your books, that they're very like visual to me. Like I really can see them. You really paint a very clear picture. And I feel, especially when I'm reading your books, that I'm watching a movie.
That's just because in my head, as I'm writing, I need to be able to see the story. Right. And I guess that's how it is. So I can picture everything happening and then I write it. So,
right. Amazing.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now? I know you have another fantasy book coming out. I have to tell you that I have not yet read the first one yet, but my very good friend on Bookstagram, Allie, she read it and adored it. And I'm not a fantasy reader. And she's like adamant that I have to try it because I love you. So she's like, just try it and then we could read book 2 together. So I think I'm going to have to give it a go, even though like I'm not so much a fantasy girly. But what else are you working on? What else is coming up?
So I'm working on Curse of Blood and Stone, which is the second book. And then beyond that, I have a few ideas. I mean, I know I'm absolutely going to write the sequel to The Player Next Door. It's The Hustler Next Door. That's been on the back burner. I was supposed to write it last year. And then the pandemic hit and I was not feeling funny. So because I want it to be, Player Next Door is a spicy read, but it's also, there's quite a bit of comedy in there.
There is. I love that book too.
Yeah. And so I think, and with this being about her best friend and who personality wise is just lends herself to being much funnier.
Yes.
And spunkier. I think there'll be a lot more of a kind of a romantic comedy vibe, but I wasn't very feeling like that last year. So it's still coming. I've got that. I actually do have an outline for it. It's a 2-page outline, not even just one, but 2 pages. And I have that all planned out, but I just haven't been able to do that yet. So that's the plan. And then I have, a couple other ideas that I'm not committing to and I'm not even talking about.
Fair.
But I'm trying to keep myself to at maximum 2 books a year, because that's a lot as it is for me.
Right.
I'm not a fast writer. I'm not, there's a lot of people who can write quickly. I'm not. So.
Fair enough. But your books are quality and that's what matters. I love them all so much. And I didn't know that you were writing a sequel to The Player Next Door. So now I'm so excited.
I was going to say, for my fantasy, I wrote it with the intention of appealing to non-fantasy readers. So, and that was one of the things that a lot of readers who said that I don't read fantasy, but I'll try it because I'm your reader. And a lot of them have ended up enjoying it. So I'll just say that.
I'm sure I will.
You might not. You might not. But
I feel like I will.
But I loved writing it. So it was very refreshing to write that story.
Okay, I'm definitely going to give it a go. You'll be my first dabble in the fantasy pool.
Oh boy.
No, it's good. It'll be good. I think that if I have to start with anyone, it has to be you.
I hope so. Now I'm crossing my fingers.
No, it's not necessary. This was so much fun. I can't even begin to tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and talking to me about these books. I love them all so much. I'm due for a reread for quite a few of them. I haven't read Until It Fades since I first read it, which was, I don't even remember, like almost 2 years ago now. So I'm really, really excited to pick it back up and read it again because I really, really, really miss those characters.
Somebody asked me a question recently about it, and I was like, gosh, I don't remember that part. And so I'm like, okay, I need to go back. Yeah, I need to
can't
go
imagine like trying to keep all of your books straight and stories straight, like especially when you have such a vast library. Like I kudos to you.
well, thank you for having me. This was great. And yeah, I mean, I'm obviously always willing to talk. So hit me up again.
Oh, when The Hustler Next Door comes out, we're going to do a deep dive on The Player Next Door and The Hustler Next Door. It's going to be a next door.
I like that. Episode. I like that idea.
We're doing it. It'll happen. You hear it here first. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.